Welcome to this 8th episode of Power to the People. And today we do something we have never done before, a public webinar with more than 1,100 people from 48 countries and in 10 languages. And we do this to explore the big question of how citizens' assemblies can reshape our democracy in Europe and beyond. But before we start, let me explain some house rules. First of all, who are we? Power to the People is a cooperation between European Alternatives, European University Institute, Europe Calling, Mehr Demokratie, Another Europe is Possible, Citizens Take Over Europe, the ECI campaign, and the Democratic Odyssey. So a big group coming together to organize transnational webinars. My name is Maximilian Freis. I'm the Managing Director of Europe Calling. And here you also can see all our guests, and especially you can see Sarah Händel from Mehr Demokratie and Tiona Birkner from the European University Institute, who both will be moderating tonight's event with me. And here on the panel, we'll be speaking English. And this English will be live interpreted into 9 other languages, and you can select the language in the control panel under the little globe. For some funny reason, as I said, Lithuanian cannot be labeled as Lithuanian, but will be Korean. And I will also have and will later again post the instructions in the chat. Thank you very much to the interpreters for making this possible. And you all help them massively by speaking rather slowly. Right. And on this slide, I just want to give you an impression about what do you have to expect this evening. We will have a start, a part 1 with introductions and inductions by Sarah Artoliri, Yves de Jager, Stephanie Hartung. And then based on the introductions and the foundations they've laid, we will have a conversation between Kalypso, Nicolaidis, and Niccolo Milanese about the European People's Assembly idea. And then we in the third part, you come in, especially then when we talk with critical friends and citizens from different civil society organizations and politicians, and with citizens' voices from you about what they think about this idea and what they expect and wish for this endeavor. As always at Power to the People, you will be able to ask questions. You can just scan the QR code now on the right for that, or you will later find the link in the chat, and there you can ask your questions and upvote with a thumb up the questions you like the most, or the questions. And so we get a bit of a prioritized list of the questions that interest you most. And finally, this webinar is recorded and will be put on YouTube and on as podcast afterwards. So just consider that when you're asking a question with your name. Right. And I think that's it for the house rules. And I will hand over to my colleague Tiona for a very special welcome. Tiona.
Thank you, Max. Hi, everyone. So as Max said, my name is Tiona, and I work at the Democratic Odyssey project at the European University Institute. And thank you all for coming tonight. Welcome. I'm really looking forward to this session. As Max already said, this is something that has never been done before, and it is a very, very special session. We will be also discussing the Democratic Odyssey project, which is implementing its first pilot transnational citizens People's Assembly meeting in Athens from the 27th until the 30th September, so in only a couple of weeks. And here among you in the audience are also our participants of this first assembly. So we have participants from many countries that were selected randomly by Sortition, by the door knocking method, by Sortition Foundation. And we have Brett here who worked a lot on selecting these participants. And so especially to you, I want to say welcome, because this is the first time that we see each other in person. We've spoken by email, and you've received a lot of information from us, but this is the first time that we all get to meet each other and that you all get to see each other as well as participants. So welcome, and we are very excited that you are a part of this project. And I'm very glad that we are organizing this session and that we have a series of great speakers that will be able to share with you more information about citizens' assemblies in general, about deliberative democracy, and you will be able to hear some first-hand experiences in this model, to hear more about this model of democracy, and you'll see how some of the previous participants of these processes also experienced such models of citizen participation. So I hope that after this session you will be even more excited about coming to Athens and joining us, and that you will understand a bit more about this huge democratic experiment that you are going to be a part of. And so now I would like to announce Sarah Händel from Mehr Demokratie, who will give us a short presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Tona. And thanks so much that everybody of you is here today. I'm super happy. I think this is really extraordinary that we came here together, that also we made that together possible, that such a big event is taking place. Yeah, welcome to everybody. My name is Sarah and I'm from Mehr Demokratie, and I wanted to start this session with a small presentation because before we go on and speak about the Odyssey, the project we are here for today, I wanted to give you a little bit the background, because I think at the heart of the Odyssey lies our democracies and the state and the health of our democracy and the big questions of what our democracy needs to be really there for all of us, like for all the citizens. So I want to start with a little presentation that goes a little bit from the ground and finishes up with the project of the Odyssey. So I will start the presentation now. Okay, everybody can see, yeah? So we start. So I want to talk a bit about the transformation of democracy, and I put the slow before because something like this is never going to be happening quick. It will be slow, but it's still something super important to happen. And here we see a bit why. Because I don't want to give you a class in democracy, just wanted to remind you of the basic elements of our democratic systems. It's us, the citizens, then mostly we elect the parties who represent us, they compose the parliaments who make our laws, and then they elect the governments and hold accountable the governments. So when we look at these four elements of democracy, then we see that we have a rising dissatisfaction with them working, because we can measure that in trust levels, and the trust levels are continuously low. When we look at the OECD countries, we have trust in governments at 39%. We have trust in parliaments at 36%. And we have trust in parties, which are the groups which represent us and our dreams and our perspectives of life. And we only have the trust in them that is around 24%. And when we look a little deeper, there's one big driver of these trust levels, and it is the position of the people in the system. People who feel that they have no voice in their political system have 47% less trust than the people who feel they have a say in the system. So we see this is what makes people untrustful in democracies. And to show you a bit the big trend, democracies are in fact actually dying in this world, because we had a good run. So between 76 and 2016, the development was positive and more people lived in a democracy. We had a high point with 52% of all people on this planet living in a democracy. But since then, it is going down. And when you look at 2022, only 29% of people still live in a democracy, and only 13% of people live in a liberal democracy where you have protected human rights, rule of law, and so on. So these are the conditions our democracies are in, and there we have to ask ourselves, why are our democracies so stressed? And there are a lot of reasons, but I just want to name four of them which are continuously pressure our democracies. There is first the rising inequality, because it defies the basic promise of democracy. Because if everyone has a say, Why are small groups over-profiting so much in our democracies? People keep on asking themselves, why do we need democracies if still there is no justice in them? Then we have the rising diversity, which is for most a super good thing because it means that people can decide how they want to live their lives. So it's a good thing that we have rising diversity, but also it means for our societies that we are diversifying internally in life choices, in values, in expectations, and in our dreams. And that means for our societies that we are riddled by ideological, cultural conflicts that often cause polarization. A third reason is the rising stakes, because there are not a few people that are afraid that World War III is just around the corner. And we all know that with climate change and the biodiversity crisis, our way of life is challenged. So we know a lot of things have to change. And with that knowledge that we need to change, also the fear comes. Because a lot of people say to themselves, in all these struggles that we have in our world today, will I and my loved ones be safe at the end? Or what will I lose in these struggles? And this rising fear is also putting a lot of pressure on our democracies. So I think it is time, since a long time, that we start about doing democracy differently. Because if party representation loses its legitimacy, and that's what we see more and more, then an answer is to additionally involve people more directly. And that is exactly what citizen assemblies do. And they have a lot of advantages. I just want to name 3 of them for now. Citizen assemblies provide us equality because every one of us has the same chance to get in one because it's chosen by lot from all of the people in the certain democratic system. Citizen assemblies provide us with diversity because we construct them as diverse as our societies are. So also the perspective of young people, of women, of minorities can be present and can be heard. And they provide us a new room for a new dynamic because they allow us to cooperate instead of making us fight each other because of the next election and the pressure that it puts on us. So in essence, citizen assemblies are an impulse for rebuilding the trust that we see democracies are losing. And it does it in so many ways. I just want to name 4 ways in which it builds the trust. Because citizen assemblies help us build the trust in us as a group. Because they show us, yes, we are different, but there is still common space and ground to move forward on also important and difficult topics. But also they help us rebuild the trust in myself as a citizen, because the people who are part of it, they feel that their voice counts. They feel that their perspective is valid, and they tell us afterwards that they feel like, yeah, I can play a part in this democracy. So they are empowering people to be and feel alive as citizens. And also, they help us to find trust in democracy as a process again, because they can show us under the right conditions, mutual respect and empathy are possible. So cooperation can win if we have the right conditions of make cooperation thrive. And the last thing I wanted to say is that what citizen assemblies do is they raise the respect for the complexity of the challenges we have today. And they also raise the respect of the multi-diversity of needs we have to incorporate when we want to find good solutions. So, yeah, it's maybe no surprise that these instruments, the citizen assemblies, starting gaining more and more momentum. I mean, they are around since a lot of time, since the 80s already, but since 2010, they're gaining really momentum, and citizen assemblies take place all over the world on all levels and on all multitude of topics. So just to give you an expression of how widespread citizen assemblies are, since 2019, we already had 2 worldwide assemblies. We had 7 EU-wide assemblies. We had 60 at national level in different countries, and we had over 660 subnational local assemblies in the world taking place. What was the impact of these assemblies? We will have 3 examples. After my presentation, we will look at 3 of these citizen assemblies, or 3 of the movements for citizen assemblies, and we will have a closer look at them and actually also learn what the impact of these 3 examples was. And I'm looking very much forward to hear about the Irish Citizen Assembly, the Belgium one, and the EU Conference on the Future of Europe. But for now, I just wanted to give you and make you feel that you all and we are part of a bigger movement that is trying to change and transform democracy. And that's exactly why we created the Democratic Odyssey, that actually wants to build on all these treasures of experiences we already made, and who wants to make direct citizen participation permanent on EU level, and who wants to show to you and to the people and to the citizens that the distant EU democracy sees the citizens too. And it actually wants to give citizens and civil society a real role in transforming democracy and finding new solutions. So for me, it's all left to say that I welcome you all on board. It's so good that you are here, and let's start our journey together. I hope we will be adventurous and we will not despair too soon, because there will be a lot of challenges waiting for us ahead. But I'm very happy that you're all here to join us and try to do the impossible. So thanks from my side, and I give it back to Jonah.
Thank you very much for the lovely presentation, Sarah.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για την πολύ καλή παρουσίαση και σε ευχαριστούμε που μας υπενθύμησες όσον αφορά την σημασία της ανάπτυξης δημοκρατίας καθώς και της βελτίωσης της. Όπως προείπε η Σάρα, θα έχουμε τώρα 3 σύντομες παρουσιάσεις σχετικά με 3 συνελεύσεις. Θα δείξουν παραδείγματα σχετικά με τον τρόπο με τον οποίο έχει επηρεάσει τις κοινωνίες στις οποίες έλαβαν χώρα αυτές οι συνελεύσεις. Θα θέλαμε λοιπόν τώρα να καλωσορίσουμε τον Αρτολίρη, που είναι ο Γενικός Γραμματέας της Εκλογικής Επιτροπής της Ιρλανδίας, που θα μας μιλήσει για την συνέλευση για το δικαίωμα στην άμπλωση. Νομίζω πολλοί έχετε ακούσει και είναι ένα πολύ σημαντικό παράδειγμα. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, Αρτ, που βρίσκεσαι εδώ και έχεις το λόγο. Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Αιτιώνα. Είναι με χαρά μου που βρίσκομαι εδώ. Να σας χαιρετώ από μένα ηλιόλου στο Δουβλίνο. Δεν έχω τη δυνατότητα να το πω συχνά αυτό και θα ήθελα να συγχαρώ όλους για την διοργάνωση. Πρόκειται για μια πολύ καλή προσέλευση του κοινού. Καταρχήν, να κάνω ένα σχόλιο σχετικά με αυτό που είπε η Σάρα, σχετικά με την εμπιστοσύνη. Είναι ένα θέμα το οποίο προκύπτει ξανά και ξανά. Στην πιο πρόσφατη συνέλευση κάναμε μια ερώτηση. Την πρώτη μέρα κάναμε την ερώτηση για ποιο λόγο συμφώνησαν να εμπλακούν και δηλαδή αφιέρωσαν 6-7 Σαββατοκύριακα μέσα σε ένα χρόνο για να βρεθούν με άλλους πολίτες.
Sorry, Art. I need to interrupt you for a technical reason. We have in one of the channels in English is the Greek channel now. So please, Greek interpreters, check that you're in the right channels. We just had it in the English. Right? Okay, so Art, please carry on. Sorry for that.
Okay. No trouble. Are we okay?
We are good. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, on their first day, we asked our citizens why they agreed to get involved. And nearly half of the citizens, the 100 people who had been selected, said that citizens' assemblies are the way that Ireland gets hard jobs done. Just think about that for a moment. 10 years ago in our country, citizens' assemblies didn't exist. And now, a short 10 years later, in political terms, it's no time at all. They are now an indispensable way of Ireland dealing with difficult problems and a critical part of the policy development and decision-making infrastructure. So let's think about that for a moment, because this is huge. You know, citizens' assemblies have transformed the way Ireland's society lives, works, thinks, and breathes. You know, and the most famous example, which many of you might be familiar with, was our citizens' assembly on abortion. You know, in Ireland, for the last 60 years, we have been unable to have a civilized conversation about abortion in this country, because the minute the conversation starts on television or in the media, people retreat to the extremes and start shouting at each other. What we did with the Citizens' Assembly was gather a representative group of people in a room, Ireland in one room, we call it, and we provide them with a safe environment in which to have this conversation. You know, there are very few rules around our citizens' assemblies, but the one inviolable rule is that we don't allow conflict in the room. Everybody gets to express an opinion and have a conversation in this safe environment. So to cut a very long story short, because time is very short here, our citizens made some recommendations about the women's reproductive health regime, which went way, way beyond the expectations of the government and the media. You know, they were probably were expecting a modest set of recommendations, perhaps around where the life of the mother was in danger and the limited set of circumstances where abortion might be available. Our citizens recommended something way, way beyond that, much more liberal. And the system was in shock. They said, the Irish people will never go for that, you know, and they just simply won't understand and they won't believe and vote for that. To cut this very long story short, the citizens in our room with our Citizens' Assembly voted 67-33 for this liberal regime of abortion. And when the question was put to the Irish people in a referendum, the Irish people voted 66%-34%. So this proves two things. One is that room was perfectly representative of the Irish people, you know, so it perfectly reflected the voting behaviour of the Irish people. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly for those people who are just starting this journey now, is that the Irish people, were much more nuanced and much more sophisticated in their thinking on this issue than the political system gave them credit for. You know, so the constitution was changed to allow for abortion thanks to a group of 100 people who spent time in a room considering this, discussing it in a very transparent and open way. And the Irish people were happy to accept that. Since then, we've had many, many citizens' assemblies in the last 12 years. We've had 6 national assemblies which have looked at dozens of issues. We've changed our constitution on a number of occasions. We have changed the laws in our country on a number of occasions. We've changed the way the parliament works. We've changed the government policy on issues like illegal drug use and gender equality and climate change and all of these things, all because in 2012, a government was brave enough to put up their hand and say, let's see if the citizens can help us make better decisions, you know, and the government's bravery here should be acknowledged and rewarded in some respects. One final thing I would say is that I've spoken in many, many countries in the last couple of years about citizens' assemblies. People come, there's an appetite and a hunger out there at the moment for people to become more and more involved in making decisions and helping develop policies. The one big criticism that comes from people who don't like this idea, or from politicians who are afraid of this new innovation, is that there is nothing to fear from citizens' assemblies. Citizens' assemblies are not a replacement for the political system. They are a support. They help politicians make better decisions by giving them another perspective in relation to this whole issue and how it might work. There is no harder issue to deal with than the issue of abortion in Holy Catholic Ireland, and yet somehow it was done. Citizens' assemblies work for the Irish people. There is no reason to believe it won't work for others. Thank you for your time. Thanks. Happy to take questions later on.
Thank you very much, Art. And now the next presentation will be by Yves Desjaguers, Executive Director of the Federation for Innovation in Democracy in Europe. And he will tell us something about the impact of the G1000 movement. So thank you, Yves, also for coming and for taking the time. And I give you the floor.
Thank you for having me. And like Art said, an impressive crowd. I've just trolled through the participants. It's really wonderful to see so many people interested in this topic, and some old friends I saw. So speaking to you from Belgium, this is a country that does three things very well. We're good at beer, chocolate, and political crisis. And I know there must be Italians and Greek people in the room who would contend that they do this very well too, but we do this on a structural level for the last 40 years. And still, somehow, our way of managing crises in the old days was that the elites of this country would, even across polarized groups, would get their heads together and kind of hash out an agreement. And so for a long time, we've kind of relied on a very elite way to keep this very diverse country together. It even managed us to get a name in political science, for the translators here, the tongue-breaking consociationalism, it was called. You know, the groups will just be managed by the elites hashing out, especially after elections, some kind of deal to continue for another 4 years. This completely came to a standstill in 2010 because we had a severe political crisis with the political elites not wanting or not succeeding in getting, after the elections, a deal together. And we didn't have a government for over 500 days. It's still a world record of the longest period without a government after elections. And during that period, a number of intellectuals, writers, started writing op-eds on, can we do this in a different way? It is clear that politics can't solve this matter, and maybe citizens can actually do something that politicians can. And this is where the G1000 was born. Why this little story? Because different from Ireland, well, Ireland initially also had a bottom-up initiative, but the G1000 was a bottom-up initiative. It was not it didn't involve the political parties. It was really something citizen-led, including the crowdfunding to make it happen. So everything came from this initiative. It was a citizens' initiative, but it gained a lot of visibility, of course, because you had a number of writers, very visible people standing behind it. So what was actually the idea was to bring together a group of citizens drawn by lot in Brussels and to hash out a few very strong themes, not take easy, the small bits, but so the topics on the table were social welfare, immigration, so big topics we're still debating in many countries. And 704 citizens sat together in 2011 for one day. So you couldn't call it really a citizen assembly as such, right? It was only one day, but over that one day, and in some tables bilingual, so over language groups, these citizens actually came up with a number of, let's say, value recommendations. During that day, also, people were motivated to organize their own deliberative processes. So throughout the country, people in their living rooms organized, they were given a methodological package. So actually, this event spurned a lot of this type of citizen activity in one day and a lot of visibility. So I was asked to talk about the legacy of the G1000. The legacy of the G1000, even though after this G1000 with 704 citizens, there was another G32, which was more a citizen assembly. The legacy is not in the recommendations. So less than Art's story where policy really changed. This bottom-up experience was more something that changed the way this country started thinking of how you can involve citizens. Yeah, so, for example, nationally, no party program had a lot on citizen participation before the G1000. Academics looked at this the next election. Almost all political parties suddenly started to mention how they wanted to involve citizens in politics. So there was a clear legacy, including using sortition. The media gave a lot of attention to the G1000. So sortition, something that was completely absent in the political debate beforehand, suddenly became something that was highly debated, that got a lot of visibility, not always positive, even some media were negative or cynical about it, but at least it reached the public mind. Also internationally, G1000 versions were organized in the Netherlands, in Spain. So this one event really captured a sort of visibility on how can we do things different with citizens. And so I think the legacy of the G1000 is a bit different, and but is on the way we perceive the political system to work. And we're now 14 years later, almost 14 years later. And Belgium had, for example, the first regional parliament a few years ago that installed a permanent citizen assembly. We had the city of Brussels has two permanent mechanisms using sortition, one on climate and one in the parliament, a generic one. A bill was voted in the national parliament, has not yet been used, but we have now a legal instrument for using sortition. So I think over the years, the G1000 has a legacy of really having changed the way we as Belgians think about what citizens' place is in politics. So we're short on time. Happy to take some questions after, and giving it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves. And as the next speaker, I want to welcome Stefanie Hartung. She's an ambassador at the Conference of the Future of Europe, and she will tell us something more about the impact of this conference. Thank you for coming tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure because the conference has been closed about 2 years ago. And so it's great to come back to this project, which I still think was a really great thing. A little correction, I was not one of the ambassadors. I was a national citizens representative, actually, for Germany. Very proud to be taken for this role, probably against my background as founder and board member of the pro-European citizens movement Pulse of Europe, where I'm still engaged. Well, what impact did the conference have? It was probably the biggest and most innovative project ever undertaken by the 3 EU institutions to strengthen citizens' participation on the European level. Just in one sentence how it worked, because I fear that not everybody in this room knows what the conference was. This was actually one of the problems which we had, namely a huge marketing problem. So really in just one sentence, we had 800 randomly picked European citizens who came together in 4 citizens panels over a period of several months, discussing a broad variety of subjects and developing several hundreds of so-called recommendations on the future of Europe, which later on were discussed in a larger plenary and also in smaller working groups with members of all 3 EU institutions to eventually become these so-called 49 common proposals collected then in the final conference the conference report. The conference was very ambitious in that all 3 EU institutions closely worked together in a way which I think they certainly usually do not, which is demonstrated, e.g., by the setting up of a so-called common secretariat, where a lot of problems surrounding the conference were sorted out behind the scenes and away from the political stage, allowing some quite astonishing compromises between the 3 institutions. But apart from that, and most importantly, we as citizens and the politicians too, participated in a huge experiment full of uncertainties about the outcome, but really carried along in particular by these 800 randomly picked and mostly quite enthusiastic European citizens who were realizing that Brussels and Strasbourg had opened their doors for citizens for once, and those citizens were really determined to make sure that these doors stayed open. And I think they still do. Sure, we were facing all kinds of bigger and smaller deficiencies on the organizational level, on the communication level. Everything was too little, too late. Very European, but still it worked. We had marketing problems, as I already said. Unfortunately, far too few people knew about the whole process. at all, despite of quite significant marketing investments by the EU and by at least some of the member states to draw more attention to the conference. And of course, the question of all questions constantly hovered over everything, namely to what extent would the citizens' work, the essence of the conference, namely these 49 joint proposals, be treated with respect and finally become reality, at least in part. In a nutshell, and from my observation, I would summarize it as follows. The conference was still a success and has provided a solid basis for more citizens' participation projects to come. It puts almost every subject matter on the table and allowed to discuss practically on any topic that one might think of. There were no restrictions from the subject matter. The conference brought citizens and politicians together, both in the larger plenary and in the smaller working groups, as I already said, allowing some very rare kind of exchange of positions and visions face to face. And that was a really interesting personal experience, I must say. And it was really impressive also or especially for the citizens to participate in the conference. Many of the 49 proposals gave and still give guidance, e.g. to the EU Parliament, as to what really matters to the people. And some remarkable new energy was taken from those proposals to the EU Parliament, especially the time shortly after the conference closing. And finally, and that was interesting because Sarah pointed that out earlier, citizens who participated in the conference or at least took notice of it, far too few, but nevertheless, they really felt that their voices counted within the conference process. And some initiatives, such as citizens' participation projects organized by the EU Commission since 2021-22, I think they still show that the doors to Brussels are open, still open, allowing new projects, such as e.g. the Democratic Odyssey, to build upon those conference achievements. So I think the basis is made and now we see what comes.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And now the next thing on our agenda is a great conversation between two people who are instrumental for the idea and the implementation of the Democratic Odyssey project. So I'm happy to introduce Professor Kalypso Nicolaidis, Chair in Global Affairs at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Florence, who is also one of the creators of the Democratic Odyssey.
С един от създателите на демократичната Одисея, господин Kalypso Nicolaidis и Niccolo Milanese.
Tiona, I'm sorry, we have a problem with the interpretation channels. There is, I think, Bulgarian in the English, or was it Greek? I'm not sure. Can we, let's continue and see. And Kalypso, I think you need to switch your camera on so I can enlarge you. Tiona, sorry, that was technical.
Okay, thanks. So hope the interpretation will work now. And now, so we'll see how Kalypso and Niccolo draw out lessons from these examples that we heard about, and we'll hear more about the Democratic Odyssey and the Transnational People's Assembly.
Well, thanks, Tiona,
Can you hear me?
for this. We can hear you, Kalypso. I'm guessing people can hear you in many different languages as well, and not necessarily the languages they were expecting from what Max just said. I think that following these incredible examples of different forms of citizens' assembly, which, as people will have heard, had different origins, different ways of acting, and different drivers. Some of them coming from politicians asking for a citizens' assembly, some of them bottom up, some of them transnational, some of them national. After such inspiring examples, the thing for us at the beginning of a Democratic Odyssey to show is some humility in what it is we're about to embark on, because we're really at the beginning of a journey. But I think it's important to say and emphasize that we're also quite ambitious. And Kalypso, I'm sure, will, with her wonderful slides, show you some of the unique features of what we're trying to put together. But perhaps just to build on what we've just heard, I want to emphasize just two things before she does that, and that is the timely nature of the enterprise. That the Democratic Odyssey is about building a people's assembly for Europe. It comes at a moment when, as Sarah suggested earlier on, there are multiple forms of crisis, existential crisis leading to different forms of disengagement and mistrust. It comes in the year of the European elections, which happened a couple of months ago. There was roughly just over 50% participation in those elections. And as everybody will be aware, these days, the new European institutions are making the appointments of the new commission and everything. So there is a timely moment to try to start a new process of ensuring people's voices are heard in European democracy, and more than heard, have a clear role. So it's timely in a political sense, but I think it's also timely in an intellectual sense, that, as Art and others mentioned, experiments in citizens' assemblies have been going on now for several decades, and there's a great deal of learning and experience that has been built up in conducting these things. And we at the Democratic Odyssey are trying to be as open, inclusive, transparent and participative in the way the whole exercise is built, so that we're really learning and benefiting from all of that experience, which of course comes from academics, from practitioners, but also really importantly from people who've been involved in citizens' assemblies as citizens. And we've just heard a bit of a mix of those different kinds of things. So I think that is the scene that I wanted to set for why it's timely for us to be launching this kind of Odyssey, and maybe Kalypso speaks to some of the unique features of it.
Indeed, Niccolo. And I just want to ask Max if you can see the slide that says Democratic Odyssey.
No, try again. You were in the moderator's view. Let's try to show them again.
Yeah, we just saw it a couple of seconds ago, Kalypso, but now it's not there.
No, I stopped it because it was the opposite view. Just start again. Should be able to start it again. There we go.
Yeah.
Now swap displays. Top left corner, swap displays, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Not really, but let's go. Let's start. We see what you want to show us. Let's go.
Yeah, so I mean, Niccolo has summarized it for us. We've heard our wonderful colleagues and friends tell us about the democratic, crisis in the world. But the Democratic Odyssey, indeed, is about time, because it's about going back very far in time. Here you have a picture of all of us at the PNIX, and I'm sure many in this call know about the PNIX, the PNICA, this big field in Athens where the Athenians for 200 years debated all the big questions about going to war or building the Acropolis together. There were some randomly selected citizens, and there were all the other citizens. It was quite an amazing vision, I imagine, and we can imagine. And partly the Democratic Odyssey wants to be inspired by this faraway past, but at the same time with a certain irony and with a distance, because these people did not always do things right. They didn't include women. They didn't include foreigners. And so in some ways, we want to reinvent some of what has existed, riding the democratic wave, but at the same time, coming with solutions that new. I think that's what Niccolo told us a minute ago. And Sarah brilliantly kind of summarize what is at stake. So we can have that conversation. But really, what is at stake is we need to address our democratic disenchantment. And Europe is in a mess. Europe is trying to exist in a very difficult world. And we believe that citizen power can help Europe address this world. So we must be capable of doing power to the people. The title of this webinar, Better. That's the bet of the democratic deficit. So how do we do this? And what is at stake here is, I want to simplify it for us. There is the crisis, democratic crisis in all these ways Sarah talked about, but there are all these innovations and democratic innovations all around the world and all around Europe. So the question, we just had the Olympics. Who's going to win between those two big forces? That's the question. And when you're in Europe, what's at stake is what Niccolo and I called citizen power Europe. Can we build a Europe that's called citizen power Europe? To transform fears of repeating bad past into hope for the future. Can we do that? So if we've listened to Yves, Art, and Stephanie basically telling us, look, we've done it at the national level in Ireland, in Belgium, but elsewhere too. Stephanie has reminded us, and she was part of that the EU did it at the transnational level for the first time, but in a way that people didn't really know about. And in a way that was not always completely inclusive, and in a way that was quite top-down. So there is much in this experiment to build on, but much also to improve on. And what we must say is that, I already alluded to it, but this is a promise for the future. That is, maybe we can be a laboratory in Europe, not a model, not an arrogant model, but a laboratory for something that many young people hope for, planetary politics. And how we do this? Well, assemblies, to summarize, to get the hard job done. See, I was taking notes, Art. And here, one way to think about it is that we have collective intelligence. We are a hive mind when we come together and deliberate. That's what the democratic Odyssey is really about. And again, as Art said, this is not a magic wand. We're not going to, make everything better with citizen assemblies. We also have electoral democracy, direct democracy. We need to think together how you combine all of this in a better democracy. So what we propose is that the EU needs a permanent assembly, a standing assembly, an assembly that will not just exist here and there. A panel is called, somebody decides to call a panel, but really a standing body, a fourth branch of government in the EU that supplements electoral politics. That's what we're after. And this is what our democratic Odyssey is after. Our democratic Odyssey, it's about your imagination of democracy, really. And it's about creating an assembly that will be multilingual, that people will connect with, and very importantly, that will travel around Europe. Starting in a couple of weeks' time, and as Theona said, we have already citizens here in Athens, but we'll move on to Vienna, Florence, and other cities. So that's what we want to do. And in summary, therefore, we want to draw inspiration from everything we've seen before and elsewhere. We would hope to see a big flotilla of ships take off and on the sea to help crowdsource the assembly design and how the assembly unfolds, have pilot assembly, and really lead to a moment where the EU adopts a permanent assembly. So this is the vision. And why do we think it's going to work? Because indeed we're traveling, and in every cities we want to plant democratic seeds. We will tell you more about what we want to do in Athens. We want to bring two worlds together who don't always speak together, although they have started to. Institutions on one hand, civil society on the other. And we are a campaign. And this is why we are having this moment, because it's not just about us and the citizens and the assemblies themselves, but it's a campaign to make this assembly permanent. And of course, we start in Greece because this is about imagination in Greece. It's about planting the seeds. And this is why Greece is a place that is appropriate. So I leave you again with the pictures we started with. And Niccolo, can you please, why don't we maybe have a few words as to what will happen to make this real in Athens in a couple of weeks?
Thanks. I will be brief. I want to come at that question from a phrase that Art used that marks me. He said that the Irish Citizens' Assembly was Ireland in a room, a representative sample of people from across Ireland in a room that could, in a certain sense, speak for Ireland. One of the experimental things, one of the most interesting things about People's Assembly for Europe is what would it be to have a representative sample of people from Europe? We have quite a different answer to that than the one that was used to make the Conference on the Future of Europe. In our assembly in Athens already, there'll be over 200 people coming from different European countries, including enlargement countries, including also people who don't have European citizenship. So that's why it's called the People's Assembly. So it's radically inclusive. There will be refugees from different countries, people of very different ages, a very, very diverse group of people. And this assembly will travel, as Kalypso said, so that in a certain sense, it is going to be Europe on a journey rather than Europe in a room. And many of our activities are also going to be, as Kalypso just showed some photos of, outside, in public spaces, as well as taking place in rooms. And that speaks to an aspect of the model of the assembly that the People's Assembly is working towards, which is engaging in a very fluid way with the local environment, with civil society that is present in a local sense. There's going to be festivals around the assembly. So these are some aspects of both Athens and the journey that will go on over the coming year as this assembly moves around and builds a picture of Europe in movement. And concretely, when we're in Athens, we'll be using also theatrical, artistic methods, as well as more traditional deliberation to talk about how Europe should prepare itself to democratically deal with crisis. And as everybody here knows, crisis, a word of Greek origin, meaning a moment of choice. It speaks to our current predicament as well as recent experiences. Every one of the people that comes and takes part in the assembly will have experienced in their lifetime crisis, experienced it very differently, and we'll take them through exercises of imagining a future, how European people living in Europe can work together democratically also with the institutions to better prepare for dealing with crises which will inevitably arise. And so there is throughout the whole model of this assembly a sense of journeying together. It is quite the opposite of a static assembly. It's nomadic, it is journeying into the future, and it's opening up minds and arms to work together in a democratic way.
Niccolo, maybe we should just make more specific what we mean by crisis, because it's such a big word, as you say, and it's a moment where somehow there's a rupture in the normal flow of things. And we've seen this, of course, we call it polycrisis in Europe. Of course, in Greece with the Euro crisis and COVID and migration, but also crisis of more ongoing crisis, housing crisis, energy crisis, and all of this capped right now by wars. And then the question is, well, isn't that a huge topic? What can we even say? But the question here for all of us and for citizens who will come and discuss together is, well, didn't these crises open some windows for citizen power, for moments where we can have the collective mind? And they also closed windows because leaders just kind of decided things on the spot. So how do we rethink these past crises, draw lessons to think about the future and how we can be more resilient in future crises by learning from this recent past as citizens. So perhaps just to make this more specific for everyone.
Thank you so much, you two. I'm taking over from Tiona here and moderating. And now I think we all got a very nice image, picture in our head, what we're actually talking about. And now we will going to invite, as we said, critical friends with maybe words of criticism, support, questions to what they have heard, what they presented, their own thoughts. We wanted to call it Provocation Corner at some point. So everything is possible, and we're really looking forward to it. And we're really excited that so many people said, yes, I want to contribute something to this discussion. So we will start with 3 small inputs from civil society, and then have a slot for citizens, and then 3 inputs and civil society and citizens again before we close. So I want to welcome Alexiane Terrocher-Barbarson, and I definitely mispronounced her name. Sorry, Alexiane. So she's a board member, or you're a board member of the Young European Federalists, and we are really excited to have you here and hear your thoughts on what you've heard and what you think about deliberative democracy in Europe. Alexiane, please.
You're Maximilian, and no, you did not really butcher my name, so congrats on that. Even the French struggle, so I'm not casting stone at anyone. Indeed, I am a member of Jeff, as we say. That's our nickname. We've been active for more than 50 years in trying to get young people feel interested in EU politics and to get them to do some concrete local actions, or also even actions at the EU level. So when I've been asked to comment on what Kalypso and Niccolo would say, of course, I'm not telepathic. I didn't know what you would say. So first, I'd like to start by saying that indeed, we need to give power to the people. And my first point of provocation or criticism from my point of view is when we mention that Europe is also a project for young citizens to imagine the future they want to get or they want to shape, what or whom we talk about. Because the recent EU elections made us realize in Jeff Europe that us, the youth, to whom we advocate for a European Federation, where we are not a single youth. We are not one homogeneous youth. What I mean by that is that we are young people who study EU affairs. We are young people who have no clue about what the EU does or how it works. So maybe the first thing to do about considering a citizen assembly is also thinking of how to go towards people who do not have EU involvement in their daily life, and also to acknowledge that those currently who voted the most to reject the EU in the elections are often from rural areas. That's a simple fact. For me, I grew up in an island in the Atlantic coast in France. We don't have a single Europe house. We barely have European flags. So should my classmates feel ashamed about not knowing what the EU does? No, I'm not convinced about that. So maybe a solution could indeed to go further on the Conference of Europe idea and to take advantage of a digital means to reach to people who not necessarily can join in-person citizens' assembly. And this is what we did with, or at least tried to do with the consultation we held prior to the EU elections. And the consultation we did gathered 1.5 million votes on the platform. And the key idea was simply to hear young people ideas on 10 key topics, such as technological investment, the Eurozone, research, etc. And thanks to digital means, we could definitely have people from different backgrounds, but it was not perfect. So how can we together as a citizen assembly use technology to form multiple citizens assembly, even in the areas we are not present? By we, I mean civil society. The last point I'd like to react on, and it's currently a debate for Jeff Europe, is where should we get young people? How can we contact them? How can we get them interested? And the answer is not only on the net or in technology, as I said, not only on social media. It is in the areas where civil society might have an entrance, namely festival, sports clubs, university, obviously, but not all young people study at university. So I'd be delighted to hear all of your ideas about where to talk to young people, where to find them. And maybe to close and to leave you with this thought, we are also debating one key thing. To make citizens' assembly work, to make power to the people in a democratic fashion, how and what's the best practice to get the EU institutions, policymakers, politicians, administrative staff to hear us? And to what extent, to what degree do we need the institutions supporting our project to make it effective? Our Your Hope consultation was effective because we reached these young people, but we also drew a line with policymakers. We consulted them on the proposals we defended, our so-called agenda of hope. But my last question as a summary is, what's the power of a citizen assembly without the support of EU institutions? And we could ask the reverse question, basically. If there's no citizens supporting EU institutions, as the disenchantment and disinterest seems to signal, what's the legitimacy of our current EU?
Thanks so much, Alexiane. And you made a very nice transition, I think, to Brett, because you asked, so how do we reach the people that we normally don't reach? And this is kind of what I think Brett is doing with Sortition Foundation, doing democratic lotteries, doing Sortition. And Brett, I'm very happy that you're here, and we are excited to hear what you have to say.
Thanks very much, Max, and thanks for the invitation to come and speak. I'm in Budapest in Hungary, and Sortition Europe, which is part of Sortition Foundation, specializes in democratic lotteries, in selecting people by lot. And we, with our Sort EU network of organizations all across Europe, went and door knocked to ask people if they would like to participate in these events. And we find actually going to people's households is one of the sort of gold standards of actually trying to talk to people face to face and explain what these things are about and how to get people involved, including, of course, young people. In terms of friendly criticisms and provocative demands, I have about 6. In terms of the People's Assembly, I think the hardest part for any sort of civil society organization who is organizing a citizens' assembly, and we're seeing more and more civil society organizations organizing these events, is how to guarantee independence, of course, how to guarantee that the people who want the citizens' assembly to happen are not trying to bias or influence the outcomes. And that's a key challenge with all citizens' assemblies, actually, but in particular with civil society-led citizens' assemblies. Of course, the second key challenge is just the quality How does a civil society organization raise the resources, the funds? How do you make sure you have all the translation working smoothly, etc.? How do you make sure that the quality of the deliberation is great, that the quality of the democratic lottery is done well? This will always be a challenge, of course, and I applaud what you've done so far. And of course, I think I echo probably many people's and Alessiane's comment about impact. How do you make such an assembly have impact at the EU level? How do you make sure that people don't just dismiss it as a talking shop, as a sort of demonstration event? And I'm very aware that you are also trying to, of course, work on that. In terms of the actual campaign itself, to try to institutionalize a European Citizens' Assembly at EU level. Of course, I applaud this as well. Sortition Foundation is about to launch our 858.org.uk campaign to replace the House of Lords in the UK with a permanent Citizens' Assembly. Of course, replacing a second chamber that is obviously past its use-by date and that is generally loathed by the population will be much easier than trying to introduce more bureaucracy, so to speak, at EU level. And I think acknowledging that challenge, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, is going to be key. I can't think of many examples where institutionalized power has given up power without a large social movement, and typically also involving some kind of social struggle. And so, of course, building that movement will be important. I think I'll leave it there to give everyone else time to speak. Thanks for the invitation to participate.
Thanks so much. And I will give the floor to the third of our first round of speakers, Alex Lockwood, UK-based, I think, writer and activist, and very active in Extinction Rebellion. And he has now a hard art I actually don't know about, but Animal Rising. So we are excited to have you here and your view on that topic.
Thank you. Yes, in the UK, on a boat in London. Just very quickly, then, my response is, thank you, Kalypso, Niccolo. It's really great to hear, really exciting to hear the project in detail. And so some of this feedback is detailed. The ambition is good. Audacious is good. And if you're not taking risks, then it probably won't succeed. So that's really great. And you spoke about it being inclusive. You've had some friendly criticism there. You spoke about academics and politicians and citizens. And we're in hard art, actually, to explain a little bit about that. We're working with artists, musicians and cultural figures to land the idea of citizen assemblies in the public imagination in a way that will be unignorable. So the idea that you're running festivals around the tour, the journey, is great. We're actually using artists. We're working with artists to reimagine how the learning processes within assemblies can work in better, more imaginative, more fun ways. And you spoke a little bit about the imaginative stuff, and I think that's really good. What I'd say is the language that you've used here tonight, I completely understand. You're talking to a democracy crowd. People who turn up to a 2-hour Zoom to listen to this stuff are part of the movement, and we're part of the movement. I think it's important for all of us, actually, to rethink about the language, our DNA, actually, and the language we use. And if we're talking about inclusivity, to actually have that, come through in the language we use, the examples we use, etc., which need to get away from the technocratic, the detailed, the democracy language speak. I think that's a good practice to do through this, through your project. The traveling around is great. It's really profound. But when you spoke about the cities that you were going to, you spoke about all of the swanky, lovely cities that I would expect us to want to go to, and not the poor areas, not the places that people find difficult to go to. And I think I would urge you to go to those places, even though I understand this is a project about convincing, persuading the political class, the political institutions to take up this new idea. I think that's really important, particularly for inclusivity. And echoing what Brett said, the social struggle is really important. So there's a model of like effective campaigns of like the 4 parts. You have the mobilizing grassroots organizations, you have the strategic communications to make sure the media hear it, you have the advocacy work, which works on the inside game, and you have the cultural space as well. And I think that social struggle is really key important. We can't be afraid to work with. I'm saying this obviously coming from XR and Animal Rebellion and this all momentum driven organizing space, but it's really important to work with some of the loudest voices in developing this public chorus for change across Europe. Really like the fact that it's representative across Europe. Love the fact that it's radically inclusive with refugees and others who don't have citizenship. I think that's really important. Like the pure model of the 100 people that are representative don't work for many communities, such as like Black communities, Muslim communities, poorer communities, because even if it's representative, they're still not necessarily going to feel confident in speaking up within that space. So I think that's really great. And the festival idea around it, I think it's really important because just to end on a quite probably cliched quote you've all heard, but politics is where some people are some of the time, but culture is where everybody is all of the time. And when you make it fun and you make it delivered through cultural reference and things that people feel they own, then it's going to land in a way that builds the momentum that I think you want. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Alex. So we now have the citizens' voices and the Q&A penciled in. So I suggest we do it in a way that I will actually take 1 or 2 citizen questions, first from the written ones, from the questions, and actually first then with those questions give 5 minutes or let's say 3 minutes to Kalypso and Niccolo, because I think there's probably a lot of things you would like to answer because they're also practical things to answer. So give you 3 minutes and then we go a bit faster into the back and forth so that we not have questions hanging around in the air. So our top voted question is from Lara Herrlich. She asked, the German Citizen Council on Nutrition recommended free meals in schools and kindergartens. This week, the financial budget will be adopted in the German Bundestag. There's no sign of free lunches for children. What happens when politicians don't listen to citizens' assemblies? I think I just leave it with that single question because this is so key, and give this first to Kalypso and Niccolo, and maybe you want to come back to a couple of other things you've heard.
Citizens can't force politicians to listen unless and until there is a struggle, there is a movement. I think that's what we're all saying. So the Democratic Odyssey is a campaign, it is a movement, it is a journey. So nothing is guaranteed in terms of impact. Alexian, Brett, now the question that we're all asking about impact. So that's the first thing. Nevertheless, we are trying. We are working with institutions. They will be present, both local, the municipality, the mayor of Athens, the governor of Attica, as well as politicians coming from Europe and the European Parliament. So this is a process. We hope to involve enough of the political somehow class to make an impact in that way. But we are not an EU-organized panel. And even there, it's not clear how much impact the citizens had, which is why a democratic odyssey is perhaps above all about the public sphere, citizens at large. And it's about creating something whereby citizens talk to each other across borders, not just in each of their corner. It doesn't happen enough in Europe. So we want to contribute to that. And that's what we want to say about impact. And Alexian, definitely, young people, they constitute a big share of the unfolding assembly, but also Niccolo and I haven't given much detail about the fact that we are working with a group of young people in Athens who have a project to create a youth council in Athens and to use the young people who will be part of the assembly in Athens in 2 weeks to get that youth council going. So this is planting the democratic seeds. They will meet alongside the young entrepreneurs and create the youth council from our assembly. So we're trying, this is by approximation, we're trying to plant the seed. And this is why, Alex, it's so good to hear you applaud our ambition, because you know what you're talking about. I lived in the UK for a long time, Extinction Rebellion, yeah. And we're all on the same wavelength, I think, about culture and the fun and the festival. Jamie McKay, who's the project manager at UI, is very, very involved with the municipality in making the festival happen. So we have this idea that if we go from one city to another, it needs to belong to the fun of the city. Athens kind of knows how to do this and to dance, But I would add that the assembly itself, like the new approach of Extinction Rebellion, is working with local actors, local people who do civic arts, as well as in our teams. So increasingly, if you do democracy, you can't do it without music, without movement, without role play, and all of these kind of fun, but also deep way of having conversations in Europe. So there's much more to say and many more questions, but I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Niccolo, would you like to add something? Or
I had a couple of sentences. One, as you've heard, it's the assembly has some characteristics of an insurgency. It's not being commanded from above. It is something that is emerging from below, and it conceives itself as such. And this is crucial for us also being strategic about the kind of impact that we're seeking to have. Anybody who's run campaigns knows that you can't necessarily go for the big change you want. You need to build up to it. And so that's why we're trying to be quite mindful about getting local changes. That's why it's embedded in particular cities, links with the mayors, as Athens was, as Kalypso was talking about, building the coalitions also with civil society, with trade unions, so an inclusiveness of other actors in and around the assembly so that it becomes a kind of movement and it builds up to more and more impact. And that is part of the answer, Alex, about the choice of the cities, is that, of course, we're aware that we're not going to all the places we would want to go to. We're being strategic in some of the places we can start because there's the most promising conditions. It means we're going to bring people from across the territory, including rural environments, to those places. But of course, we want to go further than that. In other projects that some of our organizations are running, we're building boats to go to small villages in the countryside and so on. So that is very much the ambition. But lastly, and I think most crucially for me, the big problem with citizens' assemblies, as they're often conceived, is they take place, they deliberate, they give their recommendations, and then they disappear. And that means that they can't do proper follow-up. So if the politicians ignore them, well, the citizens' assembly has been dissolved. A permanent People's Assembly for Europe means that it's always there to hold the politicians accountable and say what happened to those recommendations that we made previously. So that's a really important aspect of the model for me.
Thank you, Niccolo.
Do you allow me to add something, because I didn't want to forget this. There's I was reading the questions in the chat. Somebody's asking about key milestones and timelines. So I really want to stress that there's a lot of information on our website, and also we're coming out with a digital platform. And there you will see those key milestones and timelines. But yes, we have a first assembly in Athens. The next phase will unfold. And if you want to be involved and know how this timeline unfolds, yes, please join the Odyssey, be part of the Constituent Network. And in the links that I sent, you can see other ways in which various ways in which you can be involved. So that's one thing about the question on timeline. There is also someone who's asking about including countries that are non-EU. And yes, we are. This is very important. But for the moment, it's quite hard. So we are including some now, but we really want this to grow. As well as including a lot of activists, civil society organizations in Athens. And that's very important for us. We don't believe that these assemblies should be completely non-political. And one last point, Alex, on the cities, just to build on what Niccolo just said. Of course, it would be lovely to meet, for instance, on a mountain. But why is the next city Vienna? Because we have our friends who have created an NGO called the European Capital of Democracy, doing lovely work where there's a whole democratic process to choose what is going to be the European Capital of Democracy. So it was Barcelona last year. This year, it's Vienna, because they've done a lot of democratic stuff. That's the reason we're going to Vienna. But we will really listen and be thinking all together about how do we choose the next city? How do we move on? How do we travel?
Thank you, Kalypso. I want to get an Eve here who has a hand up. The others on the panel can do that too. If you want to say something to a question, we are very open and interactive here. Me too. I want to get Eve in, and I would actually like Eve to give you when you answer what you want to say. I want to give you a question that I think from the citizens is something that you could probably answer very well in terms of your general question about assemblies. Is Berit Müller asked, what if people don't feel represented by the people who are selected to represent their group? And I imagine in a society such as the Belgian society, where you have two big parts and Brussels in the middle, not being felt represented is an important topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly chip in on the question about Bürgerrat Ernährung, the one on food. I mean, I think at this moment, citizen assemblies are accountability mechanisms, right? We build in and we ask politicians. I mean, we don't step into the game if there is no accountability where they reply to every recommendation in writing and etc. What does miss, and other speakers have talked about this in this movement, is sometimes missing the link with other actors, both civil society groups working on this and catching these recommendations and then using them as a force to put pressure on the political system, a citizen assembly in itself. And I'm going to, sorry, Nico, but actually for me, it's not on the onus on the citizens to then defend and fight for the recommendations. I mean, it's good that they're there, but those 100 people at some point also have a right to go home or to have done their task. It is also and if you look at the Irish case, Art will also contend that there was a lot of women's movement and there was a lot going on in Ireland. So actually the Citizen Assembly kind of clicked into something that was happening in society, and that gives it a lot more force, because those women's movements and these other movements could point at what came out of the Citizen Assembly. And a second element that is very hard in this field, and we've also contributed some guidance for NOCA, the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies, on this, on impact of assemblies, is media. It would be great if in the German Tagesschau, the journal, somebody confronted a politician going like, hey, you had this citizen assembly and they prioritized their recommendations. Actually, this one came out on top, if I'm not wrong. Any German in the room can correct me. I think the Citizen Assembly in Germany even prioritized, like, this is the most important recommendation for us of all our list. And you ignore this. And, that is putting pressure on a politician. And if not, then we will continue to work a bit so in a sort of empty space if we don't get media around this, social movements around this. We really have to hope for a sort of goodwill of politicians. And sometimes it's there. I've seen parliaments that really wanted input from citizens, and then great. But then it really depends on this goodwill of politicians. So we really need to also in this field work much more on building that pressure around what recommendations can bring. Sorry if that's maybe too long, but I think it's still a work we need to do. On the not feeling represented, I mean, every individual has the right to not feel represented by a group sitting in a room. What I can tell you is I've been working as an academic a very long time on participation. I always challenge people, are like, yeah, but did you get this person who is from that, I mean, citizen assemblies are not perfect. I think even Brett would acknowledge that. There's always better, and there's always exclusions and always work to do. But there's very few cases of participation that are more diverse and richer in their diversity than two-stage citizen assemblies with good stratification. I I think the Bundestag, if we talk about it, I don't know, 40% of them are lawyers and political science masters. I mean, if you look at most parliaments, even most of them don't have gender parity. So nobody needs to reflect on a citizen assembly and go like, yes, that perfectly, you are free to not feel represented. But I would always say they're better than most of the things we have. And again, we should also do more work. This is about the cities we go to. I fully agree. The places where we get citizens, and this is about resources. Yes, this is also about taking this serious. So I think the Odyssey does its utter best to do that, but it's really a question of effort and resources.
Thank you. I will have Alex Art's hand for maybe a minute and a half, if you can manage, because I want to invite actually the two politicians that are still in the background here, because we've talking about what happens if politicians are not listening. Let's listen to them and turn it around and hear what they have to say. So Art and then carry on.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I'll only be a minute then. Of course, Yves is right. We did have a very, very active civil society group of people who had very strong views in relation to some of the recommendations, and we're happy to push them. But I mean, one of the benefits of a top-down system is that when the government establishes a citizens' assembly, or Parliament establishes a citizens' assembly, they are genuinely interested in the answer to the question. One of the challenges that is faced by a bottom up is that they are giving government and Parliament solutions and recommendations to problems which the government may or may not be interested in. We already have an answer to that. So why are you talking to us about it? It's just something to bear in mind when you were dealing with this, the engagement at a political level in advance. We don't start a citizens' assembly until we know exactly what's going to happen with the process at the end. The parliamentary committee, which is established to look at the recommendations and how we ask the government to respond formally. Every government must come into the parliamentary chamber and announce which recommendations are being accepted and when they're going to be implemented. But more importantly, they need to announce which recommendations they're not accepting, and they must give a reason why they're not accepting them. And that transparency is very important.
Thank you so much. Great transition to our two MEPs joining us, the members of the European Parliament, Daniel Freund and Helmut Scholz. Great to have you both here. I will quickly introduce. So Daniel starts, and then Helmut. Daniel has actually, before being elected to Parliament, has worked for Transparency International. Also something that what we already spoke about in terms of transparency and power questions. And he's now a member of the European Parliament for the German Green Party and the Greens IFA group, and has been also very active in the Conference on the Future of Europe, representing the Greens in the European Parliament in the conference. And we are really glad to have you here and that you're following the Democratic Odyssey, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Max. Thanks everyone for having me. Good to see you, Helmut, and many other familiar faces here. Well, I've been following the debate, and obviously, given the state of democracy in many of our countries and also at the EU level, new ways of citizen participation is definitely something that we should think about and talk about more. I think that is absolutely essential to keep our democracy alive, but also to adapt it to the new challenges that we have around us. I personally am a big fan of citizens' assemblies. Together with Helmut, I mean, both of us sat on the board of the Conference on the Future of Europe, and I would say the two of us were the ones that actually, made sure that as part of that conference, which at the beginning when we started talking about it in the European Parliament, no one really knew what that was going to look like, and it was the two of us that actually ensured that there was a citizens' assembly, or 4 citizens' assemblies, if you want, as part of this conference. I think this has so far been the biggest series of citizens' assemblies at a transnational level that have taken place. I think there is some success in what we managed to pull off with that conference. I think Stephanie has already mentioned a bit how this has worked. But I think in a way, the question of how successful that conference actually was or will end up being is still a bit out in the open. Because after the conference concluded, after the citizens' recommendations were sort of presented to the wide public, including with Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen and so on, well, we in the parliament, and there again, Helmut and I were 2 of the co-rapporteurs that then tried over a year-long exercise to basically turn those citizens and civil society recommendations into actual amendments to the treaties. I think what we then presented to the Constitutional Affairs Committee was some very diligent work, and it was a good translation of what had been the discussion in the conference. I think already what was finally adopted in the parliament was further from that, because unfortunately on some of the key aspects that we as rapporteurs had agreed on, but also managed to convince our colleagues in the committee on, we then lost in the plenary of parliament. So already the report as adopted by the entire House was already less ambitious and less truthful to what citizens had recommended. But now the even bigger hurdle is, of course, us initiating a procedure for treaty change is all good and dandy, but now we need to actually make that happen. And the governments in the council have basically, since we adopted our report in November last year, refused to even have a discussion on this. And without half the governments agreeing that we sort of take the next step in this procedure, nothing happens. And I think that ultimately is one of the biggest risks, right? And Art, you said it a bit on the Irish Assembly. The big luck that you guys had is a bit that from the outset it was clear what the result was going to be. All those citizens gathering in the assembly knew, all Irish citizens are going to be able to decide on the final outcome of this. We unfortunately didn't have that commitment at the outset of the conference on the future of Europe, and I fear, Kalypso, Niccolo, and everyone else involved in this Odyssey, you have even less of a commitment that someone is going to do something with the outcome, right? And I think that in a way is a certain danger. I would still say, what we did with the conference and having seen, the discussion of the citizens, then later the discussions with civil society, this has really, in a way, done something important. For me as a politician, having witnessed that and being able to follow this whole process has shaped the way, I think about many of these questions. It comes up in debates and during the campaign time and again. Yet there is that huge risk that, if nothing comes of it, that this actually then turns out into something that is rather frustrating to citizens when they see, I have invested all this time and energy. I spent my weekends working on these recommendations, and then nothing comes of it. And I think, and the German citizens' assemblies, for example, have been mentioned as well. It's a theme that goes through some of the assemblies that have taken place in different EU countries. And I think citizens' assemblies should really not be turned into an excuse for politicians to say, you citizens can talk here in this citizens' assembly, and then we don't do anything with the results, because then the structure of citizens' assemblies can really lead to more frustration than what I at least intended with the conference on the future of Europe assemblies, to foster democratic participation, to make EU democracy more participative and stuff. So I think we cannot think about citizens' assemblies in isolation. We need to think it with other tools of direct democracy, of referenda, or to hook it in some way into parliamentary or other democratic procedures to ensure that there is good outcome. So far, maybe from me, but I'm gonna watch with very much interest what you guys do. I wish you all the best, but I fear we will have a long fight ahead of us afterwards to ensure that we do something with the results.
Thank you very much. And now you basically introduced Helmut already, which is nice. Helmut Scholz, who actually is not an MEP any longer, he's now transitioned back into kind of being an ordinary citizen, if I may say so. He's been an MEP for 15 years for the left, also from Germany, and has been also a supporter and commenter on the Democratic Odyssey, but also, of course, on the Conference on the Future of Europe. And we are very much looking forward to hear what you have to say now as an ordinary citizen.
Thank you. So we are all the ordinary citizens, as I would say. Also, politicians, somehow are ordinary citizens. And I'm really glad to have been invited to this very interesting and challenging forum. And I would say the Democratic Odyssey is a huge, challenging task. And what I would say is the richness and the stimulating idea of it is that you really want to create somehow a participatory frame, give citizens a chance to influence from the bottom up on policymaking. And I thank Daniel for the summary of our experience from the European Parliament as politicians with the outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe and the limited outcome. And hopefully the 10th European Parliament is not forgetting the task that the already adopted resolution of the European Parliament still needs an answer from the Council, because we are in a certain responsibility to the citizens who participated in the conference. And nothing is more dangerous for democratic understanding of citizens if their ideas are neglected by the policy making. And that is correct on the EU level. That is also true for the national level or the local and municipal levels. And therefore, I would say we are in all 27 member states also in a very challenging situation when democracy comes under attack. That's the complexity of this, as Kalypso said, multiple crisis Europe brings a lot of questions to citizens. And they are maybe hearing more for easy answers than for the more need for cooperation, for exchanging views, for discussing how we are shaping our reality. And as it was mentioned by one of the participants, who reminded us about a book of Hybris and Nemesis by Professor Mansfield about the role of democracy. And I think that's really a really encouraging book, and I can only recommend everybody to read it when we are defining democracy. And therefore, I agree very much what had been said during the discussion, that our accountability must be clear from the very first moment when we are setting up such citizens assemblies, and even more if we have a permanent citizens assembly at the European Union level. What is the relationship to the other structures of our democratic societies, to the representative democracy institutions, but also for parties, for trade unions, for citizens' movements. And I saw that also the initiatives for the citizens' initiative had been here in our discussion, following what we are discussing. So I would say we should, from the very first moment, think how we are defining the role and the accountability of such citizens' assembly, because that will encourage citizens really to take responsibility for participating, for working, for influencing, and also for requesting policy to answer to that what they have to do. And Kalypso, you mentioned there is a digital platform of the democratic Odyssey. I think that's very important. We should use the new forms of technologies. We have a lot of translation today, so why not to make this digital platform, as it has been on the Conference on the Future of Europe, an additional tool for accompanying this exchange of citizens in the direct discussions, enabling them to discuss one or the other point, which maybe has been raised in the Citizens' Assembly, so to make it a more permanent discussion process among citizens in all 27 member states yet, and hopefully also in the countries who want to join the EU. So, from the very beginning also to think how we are stretching out to citizens in other countries and maybe also in other regions who are looking to Europe. What is Europe's development in the future? What is our solidarity with the people in need in other regions of the world? If we are discussing the environmental issues, etc., if we are discussing the economic or the reshaping of our economies, because also the democracy is very closely linked to the economic realities, and therefore we should be clear that the reality must be changed to get a democratic future and to save the future for all of us, also for the ordinary citizens. Maximilian, thank you.
Thank you so much, Helmut. Also a lot to think and to talk about. I really like that there's so many different angles to look at this and so many questions. Also then also citizens actually comment on what you have said, and I mean we have now 51 questions, all excellent questions. We are not going to be able to go through all of them, but we as a kind of Odyssey team and going forward will use them, we'll look at them because they're important. Maybe the citizens in Athens might actually look at them and at the assembly and read what other people think about the assembly. So that's a nice way of using this as an ecosystem. I want to give now others the chance also to respond. I think Kalypso, you wanted to respond, and I want to actually, while we respond, give a question that comes from the citizens and quite from many. So I'm just picking one because it's the shortest, but it reflects a lot of what people are asking. Is Tim asks, is there a chance that citizen councils will become an integral part of systematic political decision-making in the near future? Let's say 5 to 10 years, he says. Kalypso, want to chip in?
First of all, you said that we have all these questions and they're wonderful, and I've been trying to multitask and listen to everything that's being said, but also answer quite a few of those questions. I see Niccolo has 2 other members of the team, so they're also being answered as we speak, and we will continue to do so. There are some very concrete ones. One question, and Max, you know this very well, is that we're going to live stream most of the assembly in 2 weeks' time. So watch this space if you're interested. Please follow us that way. Also, our wonderful colleague Andrea Gaiba has posted the link to the brand new digital platform. Thank you, Helmut, for stressing how important this is. It's very complicated, to do together citizen assembly and digital platforms and the virtual world. All of this is an approximation. We're doing an experiment. We're doing the best we can, and we will see how it unfolds. But all of your ideas then are very important. This is why anybody who is excited and inspired should become part of our constituent network. Now, I would say that Yves, a moment ago, really answered a lot of the questions about impact and how does it make a difference, because he made it clear that No, democracy is effervescence. Democracy is many things at once. It would be strange for us to argue here that a citizen assembly will make all the difference. We have friends on this call who are very involved in European citizen initiative, referenda. Alex was talking about, of course, Extinction Rebellion and other movements, and Eve of Women movement. I would add to all of this that the key to democratic habits of mind is schools and neighborhoods in all sorts of ways. And this is not necessarily done through citizen assembly. So if we don't, this is why we like to talk about an ecosystem. This is about a part of an ecosystem. And while Daniel is completely right that if all of this is a kind of a fig leaf, that politicians only pretend to listen, if society at large listens and appropriates these processes, then we have a better chance of impacting politics. But we also want to impact ourselves, the way we think about as citizens, the way we create local housing association or whatever it is. It's about democratic ambiance. And part of this story, Julia Ward had a remark and question about looking beyond Europe for inspiration. Absolutely. And this is going to be Democratic Odyssey 2.0, but already we're talking with quite a few friends from around the world and being inspired by what they've done. Of course, Brazil started much of this many, many, many years ago. But there's so many other places around the world. And partly we're hoping that we are going to help a conversation that is already happening with Democracy R&D and many other networks. We're not the only ones. What we're trying to do is federate and bring together some of these other networks. And I also want to finally thank Clemens for his idea of meeting other citizens' assemblies on the spot. That's definitely a great idea. And we will, pursue these kinds of ideas as we continue to invent along the way.
Thank you, Kalypso. Are there any other reactions from the panel? Say anything about what you've heard now? Anyone? Any hands? Just use the hand symbol if you. I think Alex had some comments. So before, so if Alex wants to go in, but Art has a hand, and then we'll take a few more questions. Art.
Just a quick couple of comments, and maybe just to add an upbeat note to some of these the quite depressing things that have been said, and the confidence in relation to the work of citizens' assemblies. I mean, the Irish government took on citizens' assemblies at a time following a crisis. The financial crisis in Ireland was a very, very dark time in our history. We'd lost our financial sovereignty and all of that kind of stuff as well. And there was an acceptance by the political system in that environment that the old ways of doing things just weren't working anymore, the traditional ways of doing things. So this is the opportunity to present to the political system a new way of doing things. So use all of these various crises that are happening to your advantage. There is opportunity presented by it. And just one quick question on, or quick point on the earlier question about the representative nature of the room, people complaining or thinking that their views are not represented in the room. You don't have to be in the room as a member to make a contribution to a citizens' assembly. You can make a submission to the assembly in the Irish system. You can go onto our website or make a short TikTok video, whatever it is you like, and send it to us, and we will listen to it and read it. Or if your submission is a view that needs to be heard, then we invite people in to present directly to the members in the room. So it's very important that all citizens of the country feel that they have an opportunity to have their voice heard, aside from the 100 people in the room who get to get to vote at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I think, Alex, you had a hand before, so I just want to give you the opportunity to jump in.
Sure, great, thank you. And I did answer in the questions, but I think adding to the the negative side of things, but if we're looking at if we're following the science around the climate collapse and the fact we're going to see civil unrest because of the collapse in food systems in a few years, actually what you're doing with Democratic Odyssey is spreading survival tools across Europe, because having people come together to make decisions in communities will be a tool that's actually essential in the future. That's at the very negative end of things. At the very positive end of things, in the way, and Art expressed this really clearly about Ireland, and in response to Emmy's question about social media and the negative impacts of sort of misinformation, disinformation, citizens' assemblies particularly, but assemblies, they're anti-polarization machines. What they do is bring people together with healthy guardrails for making respectful decisions together, even when we disagree. Everything we can do to amplify and seed and spread the enthusiasm for these new forms of deliberative democracy is excellent work, and it's work that I think we should all, how can we as a movement really support that spread?
Thank you, Alex. So we're in the last 7 minutes. I want to give two last voices to citizens here that have been using the hand symbol, and actually I know both of them from previous occasions at Power to the People and Europe Calling. So great to see you both again. This is first I will give the floor to Valentina Balzani and then to Elke König, and hear what they have to say. Valentina.
Okay, ready? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Let's shoot.
Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces on the video. And I was unexpectedly, I'm just following what Alex just said, because I was just, from my experience, many of you don't know, but I have been both citizen and an ambassador during the conference on the future of Europe. So I lived the whole process, and I also, I think, as much of my colleagues, most of them, we passed through all the phases of citizen participation, from enthusiasm to frustration, because we couldn't really keep the track of what was going on after the delivery of our proposals. So it was a mixture of joy, enthusiasm, and empowerment on one side, and on the other side of really strong frustration and disappointment, because we lose track of what was going on. Fortunately, now we have a platform that we can, thanks to which we can follow what's going on about the proposals. But I would like to join Alex in the request to give support and echo as well through media to what Citizen Assembly can do, because people just don't need, let's say, they don't need a stage to show off, but they need support, and they need also their sort of to share the knowledge that this assembly have something to do and can help governments in their politics. That's, I think, the most important thing. And also on a lower level, I think that also the involvement of the national government is very, very important, because in the case of the conference of the future of Europe, many governments, many national member states didn't give enough support to citizens that were involved in the process. And maybe this this took away power from the initiatives and from the proposals. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Valentina, for your comment. Very important. And Elke König, what do you have to say? Elke, you should be able to unmute yourself now. No, doesn't work. I'll just leave this to you. And since we have 4 minutes to the end, I think we have to start closing it down. And I think we all have the feeling that we could have gone on a long time longer, and there will be more opportunities. But I hand over to Tiona to wrap things up and moderate the end. Tiona.
Thank you, Max. So before we finish, I think Niccolo also has a couple of concluding
Antes de acabarmos, o Niccolo ainda tem alguns comentários para
we have interpretation in the English channel.
Temos.
Yeah.
Okay. Niccolo, go.
Okay, everyone can understand me. Thanks so much for all of the contributions. It's been said in different kinds of terms several times, but I want to repeat it at the end, that really what we're doing here...
Ja, ich möchte das am Ende nochmals wiederholen. Das, was wir hier tun,
now we have German in the English channel. Maren?
Is contributing to the emergence and the flourishing of a deliberative and democratic ecosystem across Europe and beyond. And assemblies are part of that ecosystem, but they're not the only elements in it. They need to be connected. The different forms of democratic participation and deliberation need to be connected at different scales. And the European transnational scale is where the least progress has been made in terms of institutionalizing these kinds of ways of doing democracy. And that is the scale that Democratic Odyssey is attempting to move at, and all of us in participating in such a rich discussion and such a well-attended one are helping to sustain and enrich that ecosystem. We don't control all of the conditions in which different parts of that ecosystem will flourish or not flourish. So we absolutely can't overpromise about what we can achieve, but we can be, I think, pretty confident that given the world that we're in, the larger environment that we find ourselves in, political institutions which are static, refuse to change, and become more and more untransparent are likely to face severe problems. And our model of radical transparency, radical inclusion, and participation is going to become more and more attractive, if not, as Alex said, simply essential. And so I think with all humility, we're embarking on an odyssey where we can be in strong confidence that we are heading in the right direction, even if we're not too sure quite where the destination is yet. Tiona.
Thank you, Niccolo, and thank you all for coming and for participating actively. So thanks to the speakers, the panelists, the citizens, and of course the interpreters who made this possible, even beyond the language barriers. And so, of course, there are many things that you could do on a Thursday evening, but it is very encouraging and inspiring that you chose to be here and to discuss democracy. And I think we will see each other definitely in one of the future Power to the People webinars. And just a message for our Democratic Odyssey Assembly participants. So also thank you for coming and welcome to this process. So this is the first thing you experienced in the Democratic Odyssey. And we will see each other on the 23rd of October for the Democratic Odyssey participants in the online onboarding moment, where we will discuss some of the specifics of our Athens meeting. Thanks again to everyone, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.